His means of obtaining those small steps involves activists gathering video evidence that could be viewed as animal cruelty.
I'm back.
Could be.
That's my word, it's going down, man. Watch my voice, man. Different from other cats' voices, man. Remember that, man. Different flows, man. Hey, yo, lace these niggas with fire.
I don't normally read magazines that are produced by and for the cattle ranching, cow slaughtering industry. But there's quite an interesting article on veganism and animal rights in the October issue of Canadian Cattleman magazine. And it really makes me think that maybe vegans should pay more attention to the strange demimonde of publications that are produced by and for animal exploiting industries. The very first paragraph of this article, written quite well by Gren Winslow. He makes very precise use of the English language throughout here. The very first paragraph remarks that various industrial lobby groups, pro-meat industry groups, do send spies to attend vegan conferences. So, vegans have a sort of elevated interest in what's going on in the meat industry, and those who profit from the meat industry have a elevated interest in what's going on with veganism. So the article reads, the Animal Agriculture Alliance, the industry's advocacy group in the U.S., recently sent me a report by two young interns who were sent to blend in at the National Animal Rights Conference held outside Washington this summer to gain some insight into the movement's plans. The short answer is more of the same, as 1,500 activists from 47 states and 22 countries spent 3 days discussing ways to eliminate the consumption of meat and advance the vegan diet. So already here there are two really interesting points implicit in this article. One is that he is reporting that at this major animal rights conference, the central issue was veganism. Now that was not true at all just 20 years ago. If you talk to people who were involved in animal rights 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and so on, all of them are aware, even guys like Gary Francione, who have now been vegan for a long time, all of them are aware that veganism has gone from an incredibly marginal position to a very central position. And now the old-fashioned animal welfare groups face serious demands of saying, look, how can you do these kind of take care of homeless puppies programs while ignoring enormous pressing ethical issues that surround meat consumption? So interesting, this may not be fair or accurate, this article in reporting this, but if that's true, if veganism and eliminating meat consumption were the central issues at this animal rights conference, that tells you something profound about how much animal rights has changed just in the last few years, really. On the whole, it was a chilling summary. Chilling. There were workshops on everything from organizing factory farm campaigns to the use of drones to gather damning video and how to garner media attention for the cause. Chilling. Overall, the Alliance pulled 5 themes from this report. People need to be convinced they are doing the greatest good for the greatest number, target young people because they want to be different, lead people step by step to veganism, focus on the public because the government and police are not your friends, vandalism is warranted if it can gain media attention, and pressure restaurant and retailer policies. None of this is secret information. Animal rights organizations have been following this manifesto for decades now. If anything, this report seems to show that the movement is becoming more widespread and more organized over time. You know, it is really a brilliant use of the English language that he just starts this paragraph with the statement, none of this is secret information. It just implies, it just insinuates that this could be or should be secret information. If I say to you, right now, the Japanese government is planning to restart and expand its nuclear reactors, none of this is secret information. Without my telling you it's a bad thing or a dangerous thing, already it somehow establishes this tone, yeah? Some of the workshops got into the nitty-gritty of direct action. One well-known activist mapped out a strategy by which college kids opposed to health research on animals could trick the university into banning students from a building used for animal testing. Then he told them how to inflame the story to make it into something the media would pick up and pressure the university to respond to. A very famous political figure here in Canada, who was one of my university professors, Bob Rae, who is still kicking around in Canadian politics. Bob Rae used to always say, compare it to the alternative. Actually, I don't even feel like quoting it because it's such a corny line. But his line was, don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative. He said that a lot. I'm guessing still in the halls of Parliament. He uses that line all the time. It was one of his favorite catchphrases. This criticism, although left vague and indirect, what are you comparing vegans to? You may feel that these are unethical tactics. You may feel they're unethical even relative to other movements that are on university campuses. I think if you take a look, it's not so bad on the spectrum of forms of political activism that are ongoing in 2015. To use a fairly anodyne example, there were communists on my campus at the University of Toronto. This was around 1999. And I remember they broke onto the roof of a building on campus. It was an historical building. I think it was over 100 years old, that building. And they repainted part of the roof with the communist flag. So a red flag with a hammer and sickle, that sort of thing. So, this is vandalism. It may be harming a building of some historical significance. It's also endorsing an ideology that has killed millions of people. And, there was actually tolerance for it. The university did not kind of crack down on these communists, which is an interesting contrast to some other extreme movements and some other political symbols that might get painted on a wall. Activists aren't perfect. And a lot of methods of activism, step on people's toes and cause inconveniences and disruptions. But it's important to compare them to the alternatives. But come on, here apparently, from the perspective of the cattle ranching industry, using completely legal methods to draw attention to animal vivisection on a university campus is shocking. If a university is not a place where philosophical and ethical questions can be debated, what is? That debate in Canada is not going to happen at City Hall. It could and it should. It should be that at City Hall, the equivalent to Socrates is putting on his robe and standing up in front of the crowd and debating these kinds of issues. Doesn't happen. So universities inevitably become places where some of these issues get contested. At least in Western culture, at least in Canadian culture. Another encouraged activists to look at every action as a stepping stone, to scale back their initial demands to something acceptable, and then build on each small victory toward the end goal. One example would be to campaign for the end of battery cages in poultry operations on your university. Then push to end them in your state, and eventually end them in the United States. His means of obtaining those small steps involves activists gathering video evidence that could be viewed as animal cruelty. Could be. This strategy really hit home to me as I scanned through the report, as we've had a few fresh examples of its success hitting the newswires. First came the announcement that McDonald's was going to gradually switch to free-range eggs over the next decade, starting with 5% of its supply last month. According to Sylvain Charlebois of the University of Guelph Food Institute, McDonald's buys 120 million eggs a year in Canada alone. That requires the services of 3.2 million egg-laying hens that must be pulled from cages over the next decade to satisfy this one customer. He makes excellent use of the English language here. This requires the services of 3.2 million hens that would be pulled from their cages. He doesn't just make this sound like an inconvenience, but as if we, the vegans, would be harming these birds. We would be disturbing them in their restful slumbers in their cages by pulling them from their cages because of the high ethical standards of the McDonald's Corporation. What a tragedy. What a terrible thing. Just to satisfy this one customer. Because the only question is of the scruples of this one customer, not of the 3.2 million hens that are providing services in cages that they do not want to be pulled from. Very well written paragraph. Think about, as a challenge, as a creative writer, how difficult it is to make that sound convincing or reasonable. And he does it. Excellent job. Very well written. Slowly over time, enough of the public has been encouraged to believe battery cages are bad that a major buyer is now forced to tell its suppliers to switch. It means higher costs, which in Canada will certainly be passed on, but we can only imagine that McDonald's factored that into its decision. So this is the Cattle Ranching Industry magazine complaining that McDonald's has too high an ethical standard, that they're too self-sacrificing. Oh, what a strange vision of the world this article presents. The problem is that McDonald's cares too much about the attitudes of ethical animal rights activists, and they just don't care enough about profits and prices. The same company has the cattle industry ramping up to raise fully sustainable beef, although the exact details of what that means are still to be determined. This, too, is in response to public pressure, much of it traced back to the actions of activists. In September, the Animal Legal Defense Fund released a video taken at a Tyson plant in Texas and filed complaints with the USDA for inhumane animal handling practices and food safety violations, then asked the Attorney General of Delaware to investigate Tyson Foods for similar violations. This is brilliantly written. He's not suggesting that any of these people are not guilty. He's not suggesting they're innocent. He's not suggesting that this factory in Texas, where animals are slaughtered, is not guilty of inhumane practices and is not guilty of food safety violations. It's just a problem that these accusations exist at all. You could almost hear them planning it at the annual convention, which, by the way, had a whole section on dealing with government, law, and politics. These stories are so frequent now, we sometimes grow numb to them, especially when they hit other sectors or another country. But activists don't think that way. They are happy with the long view. Every little success counts. Meanwhile, livestock producers are kept busy devising welfare plans, environmental farm policies, codes of practice, best management practices to show they do deal with their animals humanely. But we know it will never be enough. If this report from the Alliance says anything, it is that the activists' end goal is the elimination of the livestock industry. Maybe we need to start asking, what is our end strategy?